What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to episode 149, the Designated Players Podcast. In this episode, we are flashing back in time to highlight the emergence of Pro 40 and the effect that it had on the growth of MLS, as well as the U.S. men's national team. Then we'll cover Charleston Coffee Pot game and the rivalry it created between Charleston and DC United. My name is Andrew. I'm here with my good buddy Connor, and this is MLS History Retold. Dun, 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 cool music. And they're going to add some really cool music in there. So listen to the audio, people. It's awesome.
I
Um,
think I'm gonna sub it out and put your music in there, your acapella in there.
I
That's gonna
love
be
it.
the intro music for this one.
Love it. Um, how you doing, man? You doing all right?
Yeah, it's not like I didn't speak to you like 5 minutes ago. You know what? Maybe I'm not doing all right then.
I don't think you are. I
I've been
think
here
you're. I
for a
think
while.
you're. I think you're. What you're doing is breaking the fourth wall, which we don't do on the show ever.
I've broken all the walls.
Um,
All the walls have been broken.
so did you enjoy? Did you enjoy your research of this game?
Yeah, actually, this one is one of my favorite that I've researched so far.
So I remember I did this for my first one that I did, and when I was doing it for my friend who's trying to get into MLS, when I was going through the entire iceberg lore, and phenomenal. The story is great. Like that is something you hear about, like that. It feels very Ted Lasso. You know what I mean? The story feels very, oh, we lost to Ted Lasso, so we started throwing things, and then they framed it.
Does like a Ted Lasso thing.
Yeah, my story Pro 40 actually had way larger of an impact than I ever thought it would have. Um, and it's a long one, so stick around, people. You'll enjoy it. But it's probably not as long or equally as long as our last episode where we talked about the entire 1998 season of the Chicago Fire. If you haven't heard that, I mean, go back and listen to it. It's fantastic. Actually, go back and listen to all of them. We're making a little playlist on YouTube right now of all of our MLS History Retold episodes. So I definitely suggest you go listen to them. They're only 20 minutes long. Listen to them on the car ride to work. It's great. Then share it with your friends and make them share it with two friends and two friends until we're the biggest podcast in the world. Sounds about fair, right?
Something like that.
All right. I got a number held behind my back, one or two. If you get it right, you can choose whether you go first or second.
I think it is a one.
Wrong. It's a two. You go first.
Oh, loser.
Oh, wait a second. We can't do any of that because we got to talk about Scarf of the Week. What are you rocking, my friend?
Unfortunately, I do not have a Charleston or a DC United scarf. So I brought out the Atlanta scarf because I remember that we had a pretty good connection with Charleston at the start of our franchise. I believe we sent a lot of players there kind of as like an Atlanta United 2 at the start before we had Atlanta United 2. So in honor of Charleston being involved in this story, I figured I'd got the Atlanta scarf.
I like that. I like that a lot. My question is, didn't Atlanta just play in a game this weekend? How'd that go?
Yeah, well, this episode's coming out on a Monday, like 2 weeks after the referring to. So the most recent game, I believe it was like a massive like 5-0 win. Thiago Amato, I think, had a hat trick. Giacomakis scored a goal, and then I think just for funsies, Brad Guzan took a pen and scored a goal as well. So
You can't say
yeah,
that.
things
They're
went
playing
well.
they're playing Red Bull this weekend.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right,
Um
6-0 then.
just a reminder that Atlanta lost 6-1 this weekend. So had to throw it in
We don't need
there.
a reminder. It's
All right.
engraved in my brain forever.
This one's gonna be a stretch.
Pro
I'm
40,
rocking
just pick a player that was in Pro 40.
because this is better. Ready?
Okay.
I'm rocking Providence City FC. Pro 40, those of you who know and those of you who don't, was basically a startup, a bunch of people trying to create better soccer in an area. Providence City FC is a community football group that is committed to building better football in the New England area, according to their website. So they play in the Bay State Soccer League, Ocean State Soccer League, and FA1. When I tell the story of Pro 40, you'll understand how this works because Pro 40 was literally just a traveling band of players. And that's kind of what this team started out as, just a bunch of people traveling around trying to play soccer as much as they can. So a bit of a stretch, but I think it works if you know the story. So listen up for our story and you'll get a vibe, you'll get a feel.
Did you become a yoga instructor with that stretch?
That was more of a stretch than
Was it?
I think so.
Was it?
Let us know. Let us know below. Let us know what you think. I think Connors.
Should we dive into some stories?
I think yeah. Go right ahead. I'm more than excited to listen to your rendition of the Charleston Coffee Pot game.
Yes, the Charleston Coffee Pot game that began the Charleston Coffee Pot. Well, not the Charleston, the Coffee Pot Cup. As always, my source for this one was an article by Sebastian Salazar, I believe, on the DC United website. I'm able to track back to I believe, a Wayback score sheet using the Wayback Machine and Wikipedia, of course, everyone's favorite source. So, the Coffee Pot Cup was born in 1999 following a US Open Cup match between DC United and Charleston Battery. The two faced off in the round of 16 following Charleston's 2-1 win over Wilmington Hammerheads. Now, winning MLS Cup during this time was never going to be easy. There were titans of the game in this competition, such as United German Hungarians, Cocoa Expos, and Mid-Michigan Bucks. All right, if we're being serious now, Charleston may have been a lower division side, but they were different. In the same year, Charleston actually opened its own soccer-specific stadium, MUSC Health Stadium, where they played for 20 years. This was unheard of for a lower league side. Hell, even a number of MLS sides didn't have a soccer-specific stadium at this time. This established Charleston one of the best-run lower league clubs in the country. So while this was a lower division opponent for DC, they could not sleep on them. I will caveat this ahead of time by mentioning that DC was not at full strength for this game. Richie Williams, Jeff Agus, Ben Olsen, and Carlos Yamosa were away on international duty for this game. However, this side still had plenty of star talent in it, including Roy Lassiter, Jaime Moreno, and Eddie Pope. So here's how DC United lined up for this game in the US Open Cup. Thomas in goal, Casey Tilley, Eddie Pope, Clint B, Diego Senora, Jeff Anger, Antonio Otero, Jason Moore, AJ Wood, Roy Lassiter, and Jaime Moreno. So let's get to the game itself. The game began with DC absolutely sleepwalking and doing exactly what I said they shouldn't do, taking Charleston too easy. Within 24 minutes, Charleston jumped out to a 2-0 lead with goals from Dean Sewell in the 12th minute and Ivilo Ilarianov in the 24th minute. This was a serious wake-up call for DC, and especially Jaime Moreno, who would pull one back shortly after in the 28th minute. Halftime would keep the same 2-1 advantage for Charleston. DC likely got a loud wake-up call from manager Thomas Rongen, because in the second half, they would storm back to take the lead behind a 59th minute goal from Chris Albright and an 84th minute goal from AJ Wood. While this was a sloppy game for DC, they managed to clean it up late and avoid the upset. Even Charleston coach Alan Dix was quoted after the match saying, "I felt when we were 3-2 down, we'd lost the match. We'd done very well to go 2-0 up. Then DC showed their class and got back into the game. And when they scored the third, I thought, oh, the disappointment." However, one thing DC must have forgotten was that Ivilo Ilarianov lives and breathes never say die. And in the 87th minute, just 3 minutes after Wood's likely game winner, he ties the game for Charleston after beating Prestis in a 1-on-1. Extra time we go. Goal to goal is the rule. So first team to score wins. And in the 100th minute, Charleston ball in the midfield and play in Sewell and Ilarianov 2-on-1 with Clint P, the lone defender. Sewell gets P to commit and passes the ball to Ilarianov, who has loads of time to beat Prestis, which he does win the game for Charleston. This was a massive upset. Even though DC were missing a few starters, as we've discussed before, this was early days DC United dynasty that was dominating even the top level of MLS. So despite Charleston being a well-run league side, this loss for DC was still a big deal. So much so that when DC returned to the locker room, they took their anger out by breaking a pair of coffee pots and shower heads. Which, side note, that's not cool to do even in your own stadium, but to do it in Charleston's brand stadium is especially not cool. But nonetheless, it represented DC's frustration knowing that they have won this game. I hope you picked up on the context clues, because in 2004, supporters from DC and Charleston decided to name the matchup between the two clubs the Coffee Pot Cup, in honor of the coffee pots broken by the DC United side after their frustrating loss to Charleston in the Cup. The tradition states that the losing side must fill up the coffee pot for the winning side's fans to drink in celebration. Fill it up beer. Sorry, I forgot to add that note in. In total, the sides have faced each other 3 times in the U.S. Open Cup, with DC winning the 2 other games, including a matchup in the following years, 2000 MLS Cup, U.S. Open Cup, and they met in the 2008 U.S. Open Cup final. Consider there are no rumors of Charleston coming to MLS. This cup will be far and few in between. But I would imagine if they meet up again in the U.S. Open Cup, it's going to be special for both sides of supporters.
This is the type of stuff that I think needs to be like, if you're going to force something to happen, like geographically, this is the stuff it needs to be. Like, they need a chance to go play that every single time. I love this story. I loved reading about it. I don't know. So if I was remembering correctly, it used to be stored at a pub that was like right next to the stadium. But after it was, yeah, I don't have it written down. But afterwards, when the stadium got renovated and I think COVID shut the bar down. I don't know where the coffee pot is now, but I'm assuming it's in the stadium.
The article I found was from 2012, so it's definitely pre-COVID times, I would imagine, and it didn't say where it was stored, so I'm not totally sure.
Gotcha. Hold on one sec. Yeah. Oh, okay. I had it on a Twitter thread. Yeah, no, it's not there. That's okay. Maybe people who are listening can tell us a little bit more about where it is now, because that'd be cool to figure out if it's still around and they're still working for it. It's not, like you said, it's not something you play all the time. When you do, it's got a little bit of meaning behind it. So that's always good.
Yeah, I think it probably adds even more meaning to it when considering the fact that they just don't play each other much, only 3 times in the
Right.
history of either team.
Yeah, like the Chicago Fire Dallas Burn one. They're like, oh, this is the the 4th meeting of the year. Let's see if we can even it out, right? Like, no, this is for all the marbles, baby.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about all the marbles, MLS put a ton of marbles into what they called Project 40. Back when we were a young league,
Right? That was good. Oh, that was good. Stop it.
No, come on.
It
That
was
was a stretch.
listen to the story, understand the risk that they had to take,
All right.
and then you'll
I'll be quiet.
understand.
I'll be quiet.
Yeah, quiet down, peanut gallery. Back when we were a young league, the academy system didn't exist. There weren't these big FC Dallas, Red Bull, Philly sending people overseas every day academies. It wasn't a thing. You had teams that put on, training camps and stuff for kids. I actually remember as a kid myself going to one that was a Metro Stars camp, which was cool. You got to meet maybe, I don't know if it was a player or just like a coach in the system, but you got little signed shirts and balls and stuff, and they were cool. But it wasn't a way that you could teach your club's football ideology from a young age all the way through to the first team. Sunil Gulati, U.S. soccer president, then MLS deputy commissioner, wanted that to change. So in 1998, to fill the development gap between high school level U.S. youth national kids and MLS, without having to solely rely on college, they designed this thing called Project 40. Tim Hackinson was given the job of taking 22 of the best young players. This is how it was laid out. Mainly college underclassmen and U.S. youth national team players that were already on MLS rosters, and having them compete in the USL A League, the second division at the time. They didn't care about winning. They didn't care about getting massive contracts or selling players. All they wanted to do was make sure that they could develop players over 24 months to create a squad that would be very competitive in the 2000 Olympics, and then long term, the 2010 World Cup. So in 1998, this team was already preparing for the 2010 World Cup. That's how serious they were taking this development project, because they saw there was there was potential in this, right? But they had to do it on a budget, right? They couldn't go out and just say, okay, we're going to put millions and millions of dollars into this thing, because the league was 2 years old. We didn't know it was going to last. Very early on, 12 years away, the point was that if you expose them to this professional lifestyle early, you will get seasoned vets by the time that they're needed. So let's start out what their incentive was to do this, because a lot of these guys gave up college scholarships. A lot of these guys gave up, an easy life where you would just be an MLS reserve player. While you wouldn't be making a ton of money, it was still easier than what these guys did. They were given a $24,000 check, stipend, whatever you want to call it, a paycheck, plus an academic package that covered tuition up to $37,500 to go back to school within 10 years of signing a pro contract, so that if it didn't work out, if you got to MLS for a year and they dumped you, you could still go back to school, get your degree. And this helped the over 115 players that went into this program convince their parents. A lot of them were still teenagers at the time. Convince their parents to let them do it, to say, hey, I want to do this. It's a little bit of a risk, but here is the buffer, right? So really good of them to do that. You probably are asking yourself, what's the 40 mean? The 40 was this goal that they wanted to play 40 professional games a year, either with their MLS teams if they were already there, or with the P40 team. So what did that really mean for the P40 team? What did a game for them mean? Well, especially for the MLS players, getting them into this team was tricky. There weren't like short-term loans like there are now, or giving them for a year and saying, okay, we'll supplement it other ways. This is what the life of a P40 player who was on a roster in MLS looked like. Monday through Wednesday, you're with your MLS club and you're training. You're doing whatever they want you to do, whenever they want you to do it. On Thursday, you're given a day off to travel wherever this team was going. And they played coast to coast, north to south. So San Francisco to Staten Island, Texas to Toronto. I mean, they were everywhere trying to get as many games in as they could. You would play in a Friday night game, travel on Saturday, and then play a Sunday night game in the A League. Then you're sprinting all the way back to wherever your MLS team was to train on Monday. Imagine that lifestyle as a 16-year-old kid trying to just make your way in pro soccer. It's insane, but they bought into it. If you made the 18 for your MLS team, you'd get to skip out on P40 for the week, though. So you weren't like, okay, I'm going to go play in this game on Saturday and then, or play in this game on Friday, fly back, be on the bench for Saturday, then fly back. Go, it didn't work that way. However, what that meant was that very rarely did you see the same players in the P40 team week over week. There were games that they only had one substitute because every other player got called in to be a reserve on their MLS team. And it happened more than once. Brian Dunseth, a popular play-by-play announcer, once called this P40 team the traveling Wilburys because guys would literally just show up out of nowhere and play. They were all registered or whatever, but they would just show up and play. But the traveling part is what was really funny to me, because in 3 years of this team's existence, not once did they ever play a home game. They were consistently traveling to whatever game they had to go to. The infrastructure wasn't there either. Somebody, Tim Sahidek, called them like a traveling band. They were always on the road, living out of the van. And that part's pretty accurate. That infrastructure didn't exist. So they lived out of hotel rooms and they used barns or military pup tents as dressing rooms. They would just jump into anything that was closed, change, and get out on the field. It's still to this day, I've now read this story twice, and it's a fantastic article. I should cite my sources. I like the way you do that, Connor. So I'm going to cite my sources. Nick Birchow, an MLS writer about the Project 40, he wrote it on MLSsoccer.com, April 28th, 2020. It was another COVID kind of deep dive. Fantastic article, great interviews. Definitely recommend you go read it. But let's talk about the true hero of who this story is. Her name is Jan Osborne, and she was in charge of the ridiculous logistics for P40. That meant they were getting a list of who's available, who can play, when they can play, what positions they could play, and then getting them from one place to the other. She was a seasoned pro at this. She had a long career with U.S. Soccer doing logistics, and then she also was involved in organizing the first ever MLS scouting combine. So she knows how to do these things. Didn't just pull her off the street. But she states that most MLS coaches waited until the very last minute on a Wednesday to let us know if anybody was coming or going. So she was up until all hours of the night, making a roster, making sure she had enough people to play, or for Tim to play, to coach, and then getting them situated, how they're going to get here, flying them all over the country, just to make a roster that Tim, the coach, Tim Hackinson, to build sessions, coach games, and then they had to report back to the MLS coaches about their players. It was a real challenge, she says. No kidding. Can you imagine having to do that for a list of 115 players over 3 years? Who's playing, who's not playing, who's getting released? Okay, who can we then call in? How many do we need? Do we even have enough to play? It must be insane. But as the article states, you have to start somewhere. In terms of development, this was the place that people started. And it was really good for guys like this guy, Tim Howard. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's kind of a goat. And then there's also, as you mentioned in our, I believe it was our last episode, Ben Olsen started in the P40 team. They both only featured a few times before getting to the pros, but there were other players who made the jump, like Josh Wolf, who spent more time there and had to learn how to deal with people who just didn't like them. The vibe around this team was that everybody thought they were little spoiled brats, right? These 18 to 20-year-old kids, some of them even younger, get these big contracts that we've been working our whole lives for. We're going to show them what it means to be a pro. So they were going out there, they were going to kick them, they were going to hurt them. And they had to learn how to deal with that. Everybody thought that this team were a bunch of spoon-fed kids who did not know how to grind out a result, which was as far from the truth as you can imagine. Imagine being 16 to 20 years old, never having a home field, traveling thousands of miles a week, never having a true space to do training in outside of your MLS team if you were lucky to be on one. They'd walk to the field that they had to turn into their makeshift training pitch and pull hypodermic needles out of the ground because people would just leave them lying around, and they had to clear the ground before they could even start making a ball roll. They had beer thrown at them as they would walk on the field, and nobody stopped them because lower level A-League, it's 3,000 people doing whatever they want. It was as I read this story, it was the toughest thing I could have ever imagined, being a former player and now being a coach. The coaching side of it was because you got exactly what would happen for a group of teenagers in a program like this. You had some who were professional. They took it as what it was going to be. They trained hard and they used it as their next step up. And then you had some that were college brats who thought it should be handed to them. A lot of players saw this Project 40 as a demotion from their MLS team. They thought it was beneath them to even think about playing on this team, even going so far as telling the new coach after Tim Hackinson stepped away, Lothar Oysander. He was the coach of the men's national team in the 80s, the Olympic team in 92, and took the Galaxy to the MLS Cup final in 96. And they would go up to him and say, "You're not my coach. You don't tell me what to do." Are you kidding? This dude is more successful than you can even dream to be, and you're telling him, "No, I'm not going to listen to you." And that's what they had to deal with. This story of Project 40 is such a fascinating study into psychology of sport. You had to convince a bunch of kids who you chose because they were supposed to be the next batch of MLS players, US men's national team players, that they were here because they actually weren't good enough yet, and that they had to embrace the grind and continue to get better each and every day as fast as they could. That was ridiculous. The players who bought in were great. You can see that they went on to have long careers, but there were others who very much did not. Players would try and get themselves sent off early. They'd miss their flights, quote unquote. They'd get on flights and just never show up. They would do whatever they could if they didn't want to play on this team to just be never welcome back again. To deal with this, Project 40 opened up to anybody on a roster in MLS who needed reps, injury maintenance, or guys wanting to stay sharp during the season, which is the complete opposite reason of what they made the team for, by the way. They made it to develop players, not give 35-year-olds a run out when they didn't have a game in the week. They got to a point where they were able to organize this team to go overseas and compete against some reserves of very, very high-level teams. In 1998, they went over to Manchester and took on teams like, obviously, Manchester United, Everton, Sheffield Wednesday, Sunderland, and Sheffield United. They went into this game and won all 5 of them. It was this point where people started thinking, okay, this might be legit. In 2000, they went to Argentina with players like Carlos Bocanegra, Kyle Beckerman, and Nick Raimondo to take on the reserves from South American giants like River Plate and Huracan, and they beat both of them. Then in 2002, they went on a trip to Europe again to play the reserves of PSV, Gladbach, and Dortmund. They didn't do as well here, but players including Beckerman and Bocanegra both claims that these trips were the ones that changed their life. They helped them get an understanding of the game at the high level, and they followed it up by winning a few games and showing that they were actually making progress that maybe not everybody else could see. There were some negatives to this team, though. P40 was good. It had a lot of really good things, but one thing that was overlooked was the impact on the college game. What would happen is they'd go in, and it's noted, Ziggy Schmidt, Bob Bradley, Bruce Arena. These coaches would go in and talk to coaches from Maryland, UNC, UVA, Duke, all these big soccer schools, and basically say, hey, who's the next guy that's going to get this P40 contract? Who's the next guy we got to sign to be the next step up? However, other teams weren't kept in the loop. So if Bob Bradley went up to the guy from UVA and say, hey, what do you think about, who's the next guy up? And he goes, oh, I played this really good guy from UK. You should look at him. Well, they can go in, offer him a contract without talking to the coach. He could accept it, and now the coach doesn't have a replacement for him. There were massive gaps left in the college game, the recruitment classes for years while this was going on. And college coaches really, really didn't like it simply because the communication wasn't there. There was never anything that said, hey, we're looking to do this for these players. It's not like Generation Adidas where they're looking at these players for years. It was just, hey, who can we convince to go? So it did have its negatives, but at the end of the day, it worked. The important thing to note, I think at the end of the day, was for the people who were a part of this have a ton of pride in it. At least the ones that made it through. When you're asking these people who were a part of it, or even who were a part of the rebranded Nike team, or even the Generation Adidas class, everybody in the P40 always could connect over that experience. They all knew what it was like and what we went through, and it was a brotherhood, and it still is today. You can look over and these guys can talk to each other. Hey, remember when we did that massive cross-country trip to play 15 minutes in a USL game? Yeah, me too. I'm really, I appreciate you for that and all that good stuff. It's a brotherhood, and it's really, really unique to be able to hear those stories regarding the success that it brought through the trials and tribulations of logistics and low-level soccer, really. If you think about it, there's a story there that says there was so much that went into making this work in terms of logistics and finding fields that by the time we stepped out on the field for game day, it looked like we were a bunch of Sunday league guys. We couldn't pass, we couldn't move, we didn't have time to train with each other. But at the end of the day, P40 put out a ton of very good players from its group, including Chris Albright, DeMarcus Beasley, Kyle Beckerman, Carlos Bocanegra, Danny Califf, Jimmy Conrad, Bobby Convey, Ramiro Corrales, Brian Dunseth, Tim Howard, Garth Lagerway, Pablo Mastroeni, Kurt Analfo, Nick Raimondo, John Wolinek, Josh Wolf. And that's just from the P40 team when it was rebranded in terms of Generation Adidas, or the Nike version of Generation Adidas. You're looking at players like Dax McCarty. You're looking at, hold on, there it is. You're looking at players, and I'm just going to go back, recently. David Bingham was a part of the GA class. Corey Herzog, who you don't know, that's a Red Bull player. Dom Dwyer, Dilly Duca, Teal Bunbury. I mean, this started the realization of we need to get these players involved as soon as we can so that we can get them to the highest level quicker. It is very, very reasonable to state that Pro 40 is the reason that we have as good of a youth setup as we do today, simply for the fact that it started. If this doesn't start, Generation Adidas might not start, the academy system might not start. A ton of things happened as a result of this team. And I guess one of the cool things that we can look back at is this whole thing was to create the World Cup roster. Players who would play in the 2010 World Cup. On that list that I just read you, DeMarcus Beasley made that team. Carlos Bocanegra made that team. Edson Buttle, who joined later on, made that team. Ricardo Clark, who joined the Nike version, the rebranded version, made that team. Tim Howard made that team. And I'm sure there are tons of others who I'm missing. But the proof is in the pudding. It worked. It had a goal that in 12 years, we were going to produce players that could compete at the next level in the U.S. men's national team at the World Cup. And they did it. And because they did it, we have the system that sends 5, 6, 7 players a season over to Europe in multi-million-dollar moves. Because Sunil Gulati stood up and said, we're going to make a development team. And that is the story, the success story of the Pro 40 soccer team.
So would you say this was kind of like, rather than each team having an academy, this was like an MLS wide academy?
Exactly how I would put it. Yes, they went all around the country and just said, who are the 25 most exciting players right now? And then if somebody came up through DeMarcus Beasley joined this thing at 16 years old. So, if they saw him and was like, oh, he could make a difference. Well, okay, now we're going to add another one on there. Now we're going to add another one on there. And they just kept growing and growing and growing. And again, it's one of those things you have to touch 100 people to get 3 or 4 that are going to pan out. And that's what they did. They went in and found as many as they could, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily finding the best players, but it's finding those who can handle the toughness of being a pro, right? You're putting these guys through very, very difficult situations, and they're rebounding and saying, yes, I can do it. Or they're saying, I'm not cut out for it, and they're going to act like a child. And that's how you know who's ready to be a pro. It was a brilliant brainchild of a very young system, and I love this story. I think it's so good.
All right, last thing for me, because I know it was a bit of a longer story, so I don't want to go on too long. But I may have missed this part. But did you say that they grabbed people that were already on MLS teams, or is this just like college level players and below?
Nope. So you could have been on an MLS team, or you could have just been a youth player. So, for example, you had DeMarcus Beasley, who they pulled at 16 years old. He was a part of the academy system in Bradenton. Now they assigned him to LA, but I don't think LA ever had intentions of using him at 16. So I think officially you had to be assigned to a team. However, I think a lot of the players were brought in at young ages so that they could get involved early. I mean, you look at the 1997 class, you had a bunch of guys from college, and then a few who were just youth national team guys, and that's it. It's awesome. It's such a great story.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a crazy list of players that ended up being involved.
Yep. And again, that's the thing, right? You always hear about, and I hate to always bring this back to other teams, right? But you always hear about, oh, look at what the Barcelona Academy produced. They produced all these great players, blah, 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 blah. So do we. It just happened in such a different way. And that's why MLS is unique, and that's why we love it. Because at the end of the day, we're different. We're not following everybody else, and we're still finding similar successes. Again, people don't realize that this happened when the league was 2 years old. We're still only 28 years old, right? We haven't gotten anywhere close to doing what we can do. It's an exciting time, and this is where it all starts, and that's why it's important, right? We need to know where we came from to appreciate where we're going, personally. But we hope you enjoyed that, guys. We hope you enjoyed the story of the Pro 40. We hope you enjoyed the Charleston Coffee Pot game. Really, really hope you are enjoying this series. If you enjoyed this and you want to listen to more, we've done 4 episodes already of other different types of early MLS stuff. Go give it a listen. Go have a chat and enjoy it a little bit. Make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcasts, so you know the next time we put an episode out, which will either be an MLS USMNT related thing, or we're going to talk about some pretty good goals. We've got the last second free kick goal for Warzicha. I'm going to butcher that, but that's okay. Versus San Jose for Columbus, followed by Marcelo Balboa's bike for Colorado. Very exciting time. So make sure if you want to listen to any of those, or you have a friend who wants to listen to any of those, you share it, you follow us, and you let us know. But other than that, thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players Podcast. See ya.